Hey everybody, this is Darin Francis with Signals in Higher Education. I'm also the CEO of Harbinger Lane Consulting. And with me today is Jack Casey of Impact Consulting. Jack, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Darin. Yeah, really good to be here.
Well, listen, you and I had a couple of conversations maybe a month ago and really love what you're doing over there in the UK. We're doing this experiential learning series, really featuring founders and company perspectives in this space. And what I found really interesting is just the level of deployment and maybe maturity of experiential learning in the UK. And you certainly verified that in our early conversations in terms of some of the success you're having. But I wonder if we could just maybe start a little bit about your founding story. You, right around 2020, a terrible thing is happening in the world, and yet you're launching a brand new company and product. But could you just sort of walk us through that and what got you interested in the experiential learning space?
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose just to take you back even a little bit further before the pandemic. So out of university, I went straight into working in a management consultancy based in London for a couple of years. And after a couple of years there, I thought I was potentially still interested in going into different areas of consulting. So I was previously at a digital transformation consultancy, but was potentially really looking at how I could move more into the strategy consulting area. So I went to undertake a master's degree at the University of Sydney in Australia. Because of the way the program is set up, and it's a very unique program, it had great links with strategy consulting firms, but also is a fantastic platform for going into that space. And so I actually started on that program myself in February 2020. So just as COVID was beginning. And as it did with most things in the world at the time, it had a big impact on my master's program and my master's experience, because the program, in the way that it was shaped, was very international focused. So you do an exchange in a different country and all of these kinds of aspects. And long story short, the pandemic really impacted my master's, where I couldn't really go on exchange to another place because borders were closed and a lot of opportunities were shut. So I ended up in a position where I was back home in London in summer 2020 in lockdown, where you couldn't really do anything. I wasn't in the middle of my studies, and so I wasn't working either. So I was pretty much in a situation at home, probably like many people would have felt at the time that weren't working, with a huge amount of time on their hands, with no big priorities or nothing big to do with their days. And I thought, right, I really need to do something to keep myself occupied. If we've got 2 or 3 months of lockdown here, I can't just sit at home and do nothing the whole time. And so I thought, at the time there was a big challenge for students and young people in particular with gaining professional experience. Companies weren't hiring at the time. Many companies had freezes in place with their recruitment processes. And so students were hungry for experience and just not having the opportunities available to them. And I thought this was a big challenge at the time. But likewise, you had a lot of small businesses, and especially a big passion of mine is around social impact. And you had a lot of social enterprises and charities and non-profits that needed short-term support with how to deal with the ramifications of COVID. They were struggling in a variety of different ways at this time. And so just really as an initiative at the beginning, with no business model in mind or business plan in mind whatsoever, I started organizing these voluntary projects, essentially, where students and young people that were looking to gain experience could work on a short voluntary project with a social enterprise or a non-profit or a charity for a month or two, so they can hopefully gain some experience. They also had a lot of time on their hands, again, because of the situation with COVID. And these companies potentially could engage with upcoming talent and get support in short bursts. And quite immediately from the get-go, it was very apparent that there was a huge number of students very interested in getting this type of experience through a variety of different platforms. Funny enough, back then, almost like Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups. I'd get a lot of students and young people reach out to me saying, I want to work on these projects. And through that, we had lots of people that wanted to get involved. And I just sort of started organizing these projects for students to work on with these organizations at the time. And I suppose going through that process, even though I wasn't really starting a business at that stage, it gave me a flavor for the world of entrepreneurship, just starting something and creating something from scratch. And I really enjoyed it. I was suddenly there in lockdown at home, but spending, 10 hours a day just organizing this, pro bono voluntary initiative, and was just really, really enjoying it. I suppose the problem was as sort of a few weeks and a few months went past, was what was the business model? If I did want to, it sparked the interest of, okay, can we actually turn this into something? Can we turn this into a business? We've got a lot of students interested in this help. There's companies that are looking to engage. And that then really sparked, I'd say, an 18-month, 24-month period of piloting, honestly, 2 or 3 different business models for what this could actually be. The initial idea was we ended up creating an online platform where these students could join and get access to these projects, but also get access to related training content and coaching related content. Most of these students at this time were specifically interested in going into a career in the consulting industry as well. So it was typically geared around people that wanted to work on consultancy style projects. And so the initial business model idea actually was that we were developing this big network of hungry, aspiring consultants that wanted to gain experience, that were highly motivated to get some experience. And we were creating this network of those types of individuals. So within about a year and a half, we actually had about 20,000 students and young professionals interested in consulting on this platform, engaging in projects. And it grew to such an extent that we actually had online communities that we created in different cities around the world to bring these people together to help get network effects and grow that network more significantly. And within 2 years, we actually ended up having what we called online communities of these people everywhere. So in the US, we had a online community in New York, LA, San Francisco, Chicago. In Europe, we had it pretty much in every major city in Europe. Asia, we had Singapore, Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur, and even, some in parts of Africa as well. And we're essentially on this roadmap of creating this really big network of aspiring consultants that were looking to gain experience. And the thought process was that this network as it stood could potentially be of real interest to professional consulting firms to tap into that network from a recruitment perspective. So we went on this journey of exploring whether that model would work. But simultaneously, we were also starting to work with universities in a very small way. So we were starting to organize these projects at a fairly large scale now. We had lots of people working on all these projects every single month. And I very randomly got speaking to someone on LinkedIn who oversaw a Masters in Business Management course at Cardiff University in Wales, who had consultancy projects in their master's program. I got talking to him about what we were doing. He's a professor in consulting himself, and is a real expert in that field. And he turned around to me and said, look, you're organizing all these projects all over the world. We'd really love to have these projects as part of our course here at Cardiff. We've got 200 students on our program. Would you be able to provide us about 30 projects in about 6 to 8 weeks for our students to work on this summer?
Are we still in lockdown at this point? Or is this this is beyond, this is after?
Yes. So this at this point is getting towards, I'd say like March, April 2021. So, I mean, I can't remember what the situation was in the UK by then, but we were still dipping in and out of lockdown. And so I turned around to him and said, "Okay, that sounds really interesting. I think we can help here." And so quite quickly provided a large number of non-profits, maybe small businesses and startups for students to work with as part of his course. Of course, with that sort of initial pilot that we did with them, it sparked an interest of, okay, could this be of more interest to other universities? So we then went through a process of simultaneously almost running two business models side by side to see what would work, of the platform model with professional firms accessing students and young professionals interested in consulting from a recruitment perspective, but then also trying to see how we could work with universities in this way. And over the next 6 to 9 months, it became very clear that the recruitment model with the consulting firms became a really difficult model to probably do. From a predictable revenue perspective and recurring revenue perspective, it's a tough world. Ask any recruitment agency, it's not even. And the recruitment agency in that space is so set in its ways, it's hard to develop a model that's different from the status quo. But at the same time, we were starting to work with a few more universities and business schools in the UK. And we were seeing that as being actually this more untapped market where there was seemed like more interest. We probably didn't have a good understanding of how that market really operated at first, but there was more promising conversations that we were having. And so after that period of time, it became very clear that actually we needed to really go all in on what we were doing with universities. So at this stage, we'd started to work with quite a few more UK universities. We were delivering a good service. We were getting really good feedback. It was evident that universities would be keen to utilize our support year on year. And so it was a much more predictable business model where you could see greater opportunities for growth and sustainable growth in the coming years. And so at that time, we made a really difficult decision of basically cutting off everything we were doing except for our work with universities. So even with all those online communities that we created all over the world, we closed all of them down. We shut all of that off. We didn't continue with that platform anymore, and we basically went all in on how we work with universities. And during that time, we really got a better understanding of the higher ed sector. So, for me, I'd never worked in the higher ed sector before. Obviously, I was a student at university and knew how it worked from a student perspective. But actually, what drives higher ed decisions, or what is important to universities and affects their decisions and maybe their investment decisions, is something that I really had no understanding of. So it was very much a journey to understand the business model behind universities and to understand what's really important to them as well, which helped to continue shape how we would have conversations with universities in future, I suppose up to now, but also shape how we work with the universities through our solutions.
I want to get into why clearly you saw, an immediate fit on the student side, very immediate interest in the student side. I get that it, for different reasons, needed to pivot to the university. And I want to get to the university model and what you saw as important to them. But before we do, jump into today, and it'll help answer this. Let's talk about your model as it is today, because now you've gone into so many areas. I mean, including dissertation projects. So help me understand what's the breadth of offerings today, and then I want to understand kind of how you got there with universities, because that's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we really see ourselves as the end-to-end work-based learning provider. So I think most universities have slightly different approaches to how they want to adopt and scale experiential learning and work-based learning within their institutions. That's definitely the case within the UK anyway. So some universities are adopting approach of sort of company projects or sort of live briefs, whereas others, it may be through a placement model, placement years, and credit-bearing internship modules, let's say. And whilst the language that universities adopt is different for the work-based learning solution themselves, the actual end-to-end process in sourcing and securing these opportunities for students to work on is very similar. So on our end, whether we are supporting a university with organizing company projects or internships, the way in which we reach out and engage with organizations and organize those activities is very similar. So the ability for us to very easily and efficiently sort of support universities across those different areas of work-based learning works nicely. So for us, really, it's a case of working across those core solutions of work-based learning, which is company projects. You mentioned dissertation projects there, which is similar in nature, where students are working with an organization on a challenge they're facing, but it's a case of where the project topic itself becomes the topic for a dissertation or for a thesis. So it's combining work experience with a critical element of students' degree programs, and likewise with internships and placements. So for us, traditionally, it's been about understanding what a given university's approach is, what their strategy is to work-based learning and their priorities, and then supporting them with a solution that best fits with how they're looking to scale and grow work-based learning.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so now maybe I guess my first question at this point is, how does the university refer to you? Are you a platform? Are you a tech-enabled service? Are you something else? How does the university see their relationship with Impact Consulting?
Yeah, really great question. So I'd like to see us as their strategic work-based learning provider. What we are providing is an end-to-end work-based learning solution, which is very hands-off from a university perspective. So for a university to grow and scale their work-based learning, whether that's internally or by using an external provider, it is a big undertaking. It does require significant numbers of personnel and resources of people who are going to be connecting with companies on a daily basis, meeting with those companies, organizing and defining these opportunities, and then overseeing the end-to-end successful management of those from start to finish. And so some universities can look to do that fully internally, and some will do that fully internally. But typically, from what we've seen, for most universities to do that at scale internally is very challenging, especially when you're talking about hundreds or thousands of students. And so on our end, we see ourselves as that strategic partner to help them scale, because we can work with certain programs, we can work with a school. So we often work at, let's say, a business school level, where we are providing work-based learning opportunities for all of their students across, multiple programs, or even working at a university-wide level. So from a university perspective, that process means that they need to connect with us and provide us with their detailed requirements of what they are looking for. But then it's pretty hands-off from that perspective. We're the ones actually going away, talking to companies, organizing the opportunities specifically for their programs, specifically for their courses, so that a cybersecurity student is gaining a cybersecurity-related professional experience. Likewise with a marketing student or a psychology student or whatever it may be. And again, to operationalize that or manage that process internally is very complex. It requires a very powerful internal tech infrastructure, I'd say, to be able to engage with that sheer number of volume of companies to facilitate those opportunities, but also requires a huge employer network as well, which for universities to do this at scale, many universities may not have those connections. So a core USP for us is also really around our company network, from being able to bring on board, not just SMEs and smaller businesses, but multinationals, NGOs and non-profits as well.
If I focus in a little bit on the university perspective here, I get it. You're providing a great service because you're actually helping them scale something that to do on their own would be kind of almost a bit outside their comfort zone. They're not staffed to do this. Now think about it again from the university perspective, and I'm just curious in the UK if there's a big difference here. But what are the main benefits they're expecting from this kind of overarching work-based learning, experiential learning provider that you are?
Yeah, so I think different universities are in the UK anyway. There's definitely a big trend in this space in the UK where clearly universities right now are prioritizing growing work-based learning activities in their programs for a number of reasons. It could be that they are looking to increase the attractiveness of their courses to prospective students, to therefore support their student recruitment efforts and attract more students to their programs. Students are increasingly interested in understanding what they're really going to get as part of their course, and for a university to say that they can guarantee some form of professional experience as part of the program can be a really key USP over another university that may not have the same type of offering in their program. So that can be a big incentive for universities to want to scale these activities to help with their student recruitment. Secondly is around employability. We gather a lot of data from students who work on these projects or internships or placements as part of their program, and the data speaks for itself. Students, overwhelmingly feel like these experiences enhance their employability. It gets them used to engaging with organizations in the workplace when they may not have had that exposure before. It gives them a really great talking point for their CV and for interviews. So they feel like they've got more powerful topics to talk about during sort of their applications and interview processes. and also enhancing the student experience. You know, students and their levels of engagement with different degree programs has been under the spotlight in higher ed over the recent years. I think especially over the period since COVID, where many institutions have found student engagement levels have dropped. And so having in place activities that increase student engagement with a course has become increasingly important to different higher ed institutions. And so work-based learning kind of perfectly sits at the intersection of that Venn diagram, which is for a university looking at how they can increase their student recruitment, how can they increase the employability of their students and enhance the student university degree program experience. It's probably one of those rare activities that a university can do that's going to have a fundamental impact on the success of all three of those areas in a very meaningful way. And so by getting work-based learning done right, or enhancing the number of students that have access to those opportunities, you potentially support three key objectives or three clear KPIs for an institution very quickly. Work-based learning and scaling work-based learning, isn't easy for any institution, but it tackles some of the key challenges that universities are facing today head on through one strategic initiative, which is how do we grow these opportunities for students?
Help me also understand this. So there's at the individual institution level, you go in with an initiative, and I would assume often you're placed in an environment where you need to do pilots in certain areas, and then you grow from there. So I'm curious about, from an institution perspective, and maybe just think about it from the UK perspective first. Do you feel like an institution can get to a full comprehensive strategy around work-based learning within a 3-year span, a 5-year span, shorter? Like what's becoming a normal adoption cycle to you, or is it very different everywhere?
Yeah, such a great question. I think it varies. I think the level of appetite for a university to grow this quickly has an impact. I've seen institutions grow their work-based learning to a significant number of students fairly quickly in a sort of 2-year horizon, but it can take longer. I think one of the challenges a lot of institutions face is around reshaping courses to allow for these activities. So there's the fast implementation model for institutions, which is providing these students with experience at scale outside of the curriculum, where it's engaging them in extracurricular projects, internships, placements, which is the faster way, but I don't believe it's the right way. I think if universities want to do this properly, it needs to become a fundamental part of the curriculum. It should be a module within a course, for example, because then you're really ensuring a quality of opportunity. So, for example, in the UK right now, cost of living in the UK has grown significantly in recent years. Many students, if not most students, have to hold down a part-time paid role, alongside their studies. That could be working at a supermarket, that could be working at a pub, and to engage in an extracurricular work-based learning activity on top of that and on top of their studies could be a huge challenge for a lot of students. So for students that might have the luxury of getting access to those opportunities because they don't need a part-time paid role on the side, then they can engage in those activities. But often for students that don't have that luxury, it's harder for them to. So for a university to engage students in a fair and equal measure in these activities where everyone can have equal access to them, I think in the curriculum is the right way of doing it. But the challenge is having the programs with the structure and format to allow for those activities. And that's where that can make it a slower process. So for some universities to change their curriculum to allow for certain modules to be in place to allow for these activities that can be a multi-year process. We've seen some universities really prioritize this and get approval quickly, and suddenly that's become a one academic year process. But it does vary. I think it depends on the level of buy-in at the top in terms of the strategic leadership level of a business school or the university to impact those decisions. And it's also impacted by what drives those decisions as well. I think right now, because a lot of institutions are seeing their competitors do this, they're seeing universities of a similar ranking, of a similar size, of a similar situation doing this. There's a general trend of universities thinking that, well, if we don't also adopt these experiences for students, there's the risk of being left behind. And so that also drives faster adoption to ensuring they get these activities within the curriculum, within 1 or 2 years, rather than having a really long drawn out strategy of maybe to get to that point within 5 years.
I'll frame the US as I understand it. My firm's done a fair amount of research in this area for other companies looking to grow in the market. And what we're seeing in the US is that it's a deeply fragmented experience around experiential learning, work-based learning, that you hit on it. One of the main issues is that there are what we would call course codes available to set in an interdisciplinary course throughout the curriculum, but there's no strategy associated with it institutionally. And so, to your point, some level of modification needs to happen fundamentally to the curriculum for these students. And so that's an interesting opportunity in and of itself in the US. It's great to kind of see, we're already getting hints at it, but I love that you've already hit on, to me, the holy grail of adoption in learning technologies is, can it be used to help recruit, retain, and complete a program for a student, and also can it lead to employment? And so the fact that there's you're seeing these three things: employment, retention, and recruiting, as sort of table stakes to an offering in the UK, gives me great hope that US institutions will sort of see that and let that drive the institutional strategy more, right? That's just where we're at. But you're at a great time to come into the US. I guess I wonder, do you feel like at the point in which you entered the market in the UK that a lot of these problems were already being worked on, and therefore you took some momentum that was already there and kind of went with it? Or do you feel like you were at the really beginning stages in the UK's adoption, in UK university's adoption of work-based learning?
Yeah, really good question. So I suppose with so many startups, timing is so critical. You need to be entering a market and an industry and landing on a trend. And I think we generally started working on this as it was becoming more important for universities to do it. And over the last couple of years, that growing trend for adoption has definitely increased. And now institutions are getting to the point where they are seeing their competitors do it, and increasingly do it well and at a greater scale, where they are getting to a point of knowing that if they also don't adopt these activities, that they will be left behind. So I think we have been really lucky with timing. I think every market and country is different. It's been interesting for us to sort of explore and see how other countries are approaching work-based learning and their level of maturity in adopting it. I mean, from my understanding and from what I've seen, for example, Canada seems really advanced. Probably the most advanced country out there in terms of level of adoption, and just it's very normal and very natural for this to be done at a good size and scale at most institutions in the country. The UK is kind of on that journey to try and get there, it feels right now. And then with the US, I think that time is still to come, but from conversations I've had and my understanding, it feels like the US is probably still maybe a few years behind in the level of adoption to the UK, if not more. So it'll be really interesting to see where the US is at in another 5 to 10 years, to see, is this becoming an increasingly important strategic conversation for institutions to be having of how they do this. There's a huge number of macro trends that are impacting higher ed at the moment in general. We're going, I think, into an era where colleges and universities are increasingly having to prove the return on investment that they're providing to students. Obviously in the US, UK students are going into huge amounts of debt already to go through university, but it's still nowhere near the levels of debt that some students in the US are going through. And increasingly people are asking, is a college degree worth it? Is this going to get me a high quality, good, well-paying graduate job at the end? And I think with a lot of changes happening in the coming years with the labour market in general, increasing adoption of AI, automation, increasing level of competition amongst entry-level roles, it is potentially getting harder for students to stand out and to secure graduate level employment. And so universities, I think in the US as well, will increasingly have to prove that they are able to put their students in the best possible positions to get the kind of jobs that they'd expect out of the degrees that they're going through. And to give students that level of industry exposure that gives them that access to engaging with companies and to building their CV, enhancing their employability. Work-based learning is the key way to do that. So I think it's a matter of time, but I can envision in another 5 years that this becomes a bigger talking point, let's say at a strategic level within institutions in the US as well, because of so many of the macro tailwinds that are hitting higher ed at the moment.
I hope you're right. I mean, I think we're I think there's some really progressive universities of all types in the US that are stepping up and saying radical things like, we're going to change our curriculum so that every student graduates with 2 years worth of work experience. Like they're starting to draw some lines in the sand. And that's, as that happens in different sectors in the US, that's going to create the level of competition. If it's just the elite institutions doing it, that doesn't force its way down. But if you have regional public universities and R1s and privates and elites all kind of starting to say the same things, which they are all in pockets, I think there's real space for this. Let me in closing ask you to think about a US university with me. And I'll give you just the simple setup, because I think you understand what's going on here. So a U.S. college president or provost who's listening, and they're thinking, look, we need to do more with experiential learning. Where would you have them start? right? They've got some fragmented, they've got some faculty that are doing some great things on their own. They've maybe got, a single embedded course here or there, but there's no institutional strategy. Where do I start?
For those universities that, are doing it maybe in fragments, I think often at sort of a leadership level or in like central careers teams, let's say, that they might not really have good visibility of what's happening in different faculty areas and schools. So I think the first step is to get an understanding of what is already happening across the institution and identify good case studies and good practices to follow. So, you might find that in the business school, they are adopting consulting projects or a micro internship model, which is working really effectively. It's really popular with students. They're maybe getting really good feedback from students and really good feedback from companies. And for that institution in that situation, they might find that is a fairly quick and effective model to deploy in other aspects and other areas of the university. I think simultaneously benchmarking is always such a valuable activity. So, compare yourself to institutions of a similar size, of a similar situation, also see what they're doing. You may find that they are doing more, but they might also be doing less, and it's an opportunity to differentiate your programs from programs offered at similar institutions, which could also provide your university with a competitive advantage for attracting students over others. So I think the first step is to get a flavour for your current situation and what's happening more broadly within your competitive landscape, very much in a sort of mini consulting project style. And then it's like you said, it's like looking at developing what is the institution's strategy for work-based learning. Now, of course, a clear centralized strategy is probably going to be the easiest thing to trickle down, but you do need to bear in mind the context of different courses. So what works well in the business school for work-based learning may not work very well for, let's say, medical programs versus engineering and so on. So there often is that sort of tailored approach for different academic schools based on what works well. And then beyond that strategy, it's looking, okay, how do we actually implement and execute, which is the hardest bit of it all. Ultimately it all comes down to execution. Part of that is having the right framework in place in the curriculum to allow for these opportunities. So, as said earlier, a quick model to adopt for generating these experiences at scale is probably outside of the curriculum. It's probably not the best way to do it, but it might be a starting point for some institutions.
That's a good point. It might get you there a little bit faster, give you more use cases, show you some momentum.
Yeah, exactly. And during that process, you capture feedback from students, you get buy-in from staff members within the institution. Often we've seen that, one of the biggest barriers for adoption for this could be, internal stakeholders thinking that, okay, we shouldn't be doing this or we should be doing that. And so actually getting the buy-in and support of key people is a critical element to that journey as well. And sometimes starting with extracurricular activities, proving the value and gaining the positive experience and testimonials from students and companies helps with getting the support to do these activities more within the curriculum as well. Once you've got, I suppose, the framework in place of how you want to adopt scaling work-based learning, then it's, okay, how are you actually going to do that? Do you want to leverage, do you have in place internal people that can do it, or to a certain extent, or do you want to partner with an external organization that can help facilitate the delivery of these projects, internships, and so on, experiences at scale? So, and that's definitely a journey. And I think, yeah, from our conversation, from what I've seen, a lot of US institutions are maybe in that kind of developing this in the research, developing the strategy, and getting in place the plan potentially for how to do this. Whereas UK universities right now are probably a lot of them are working out the execution model for how to do it, which might be a 2 or 3 year type gap, I would potentially say. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the US continues to move along that journey to adoption.
Yeah.
But as in any market, your biggest drivers or key pushing points for you to do something may be also external pressures. What are your competitors doing? What is the market doing? And if institutions are seeing, a lot of institutions in their state of a similar size and attracting similar students doing this, the pressure is there to get moving.
For sure. Well, Jack, this has been a really helpful exploration with you, both of your business, but also how you think. It's hard for me to believe that, just a few short years ago, you were knowing nothing about the market. And now I feel like talking to you, I feel like you've, by building the business that you've built, you've really developed a strong understanding of both what's going on in the UK and the US. But I wish you guys the best of luck. I think you're going to do great. And as you start to come here to the US more, I look forward to maybe getting to meet you in person as well. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. No, thanks, Darin. It's been great to be on.